I think it's fair to say that when it comes to portraying the future of Starfleet, Star Trek Online can often feel a little bit unsatisfactory. A good example of this would be the Andromeda class, which is essentially a Galaxy class, but grey. I think future Starfleet should look very different from what has come before, in much the same way that the Enterprise J is in many ways very different from anything that came before. In some ways, perhaps actually not different enough. Perhaps that's a subject for another day. But I think a good example of what the future of Starfleet could look like comes with the Emissary class. This is a ship that feels far more a successor and inheritor of the Starfleet of the next generation, and far less another anti-Borg super sleek warship, which has become so common these days in both the fandom and in STO. Additionally, we do see very frequently that in STO there's an awful lot of reduxing old concepts. Here's the future Miranda, here's the future Nova class, here's the future Saber class, and so on and so forth. And it's like, that's not how that works. Designs change, develop, and evolve, and morph. We do not have the latest iteration of the Tyrannosaurus, now do we? Evolution doesn't work like that, and nor should it in Starship design. Now, previously, the Emissary felt very much like an outsider. It's quite an unusual design. But actually, since Star Trek Prodigy, with the introduction of the USS Protostar, it's now got a very clear cousin. The two ships share an awful lot of design language. They're very similar. And I think they could definitely fit as two ships from the same period. Unfortunately, I think Prodigy is set far too early for its own good. But I think the Emissary is a good design to showcase what the Starfleet of the mid to late 25th century should look like, and can forge the way in exploring an all-new frontier. So, without any further ado, let's get into it. Let's look at the design, history, and heritage behind the Emissary class. So the original design that it is based on is, of course, the Argonaut class battleship. This was a groundbreaking hull design, a long, low hull design, very Klingon in many respects, and it was a very successful and sleek design. It had its compromises and its weaknesses compared to other hull forms, but it was a very successful design. As well as that, we also saw, much like how the Intrepid class was almost a miniaturized version of a Galaxy class in many respects, we see a similar thing happen with the Pathfinder class, being, once again, a miniaturization of the Argonaut class. This particular design was overseen by Admiral Tuvok and was very much designed to exploit extremely variable warp geometry. The Pathfinder was very different from the original Intrepid, which had a very simple variable warp geometry. But the Pathfinder had multiple different geometries at which it could form a warp field, so it was much sleeker and much faster than the Intrepid. It also boasted far more powerful sensors, some very impressive sensor arrays. It also had far more endurance than the Intrepid. It's a lot bigger than the Intrepid. And that ship would serve into the mid-25th century, where Starfleet would go on to spawn a successor both for it and also a true successor to the Argonaut. And this is where the Emissary comes from. The design specifications for the Emissary were as follows. Starfleet wanted a vessel that was larger and longer range than the Pathfinder, equal in capabilities to a Galaxy class. It was to have a high real space warp speed and be well armed, all the things you would typically expect for a long-range explorer. But critically, this is where it gets interesting. It must be rated for extended travel through transwarp conduits and other subspace corridors. This was something that had never been done before. Particularly during Voyager's travels, it discovered an awful lot of subspace corridors, transwarp conduits, wormholes, all these things which allow you to cross vast areas of space even faster. And the main problem is that these kinds of phenomena are extremely hazardous, and most starships are not really built to handle those kind of vortexes. And so the idea behind the Emissary was to build a ship that could safely traverse these new dimensions of travel. And of course, this ties back to its namesake, Emissary. The Emissary being Sisko, that was given to him after he encountered the wormhole aliens in the Bajoran wormhole. And so when you're travelling through such things, there's also a hope, a small hope given how vast the dimensions of subspace are, but there's a small hope that one might also encounter new life and new civilizations tucked away somewhere in subspace. And so it was named for that very hope. But what you have here is a long-range exploration ship with interdimensional capabilities. It is designed expressly for the dangerous and most perilous form of travel, subspace travel. And by traversing the universe using subspace corridors, transwarp conduits, and wormholes, the hope was that the Emissary class would allow the exploration of the Gamma and Delta quadrant. So, the Emissary class itself has a length of 720 meters, a width of 270 meters, a draft of 100 meters with 21 decks. It has a crew of over 5,000. This includes, of course, scientists, anthropologists, archaeologists, biologists, metaphysicists, and of course, its Starfleet crew. In terms of propulsion, it is propelled through space by two very powerful warp nacelles with 8 warp coils that have an area of 40 meters by 20 meters. These are very large warp nacelles and very powerful warp engines. And at sublight, it is propelled by a single vectored impulse unit at the very back of the ship. This is perhaps the one weakness of the Emissary class. It is not particularly maneuverable or agile at impulse. In fairness, the Argonaut was not, but this is perhaps even worse. In terms of defences, this ship is incredibly well protected. It has deployable, regenerative hull armour, metaphasic shielding, and subspace shields. This is particularly important, because it means that you're protected from subspace weapons, transphasic weapons, and telepathic incursions. Once again, very much informed by the experiences of the USS Voyager. In terms of torpedoes, it is equipped with 2 aft torpedo launchers, 2 fore torpedo launchers, and then 4 heavy torpedo launchers on the port and starboard side of the saucer. This can launch a wide variety of very powerful ordnance to defend itself, including siege caliber torpedoes and other similarly powerful weapons. It is protected by a further 6 phaser arrays and has 5 heavy emitters on the front of the ship. These can be configured to fire pulse phasers, but can also be chained together to fire a lance phaser. So it's a very modular weapon system that allows the Emissary to confront a variety of threats. In terms of additional facilities, it also has 4 launch bays. These are effectively 2 through-deck launch bays in the lower half of the engineering hull, although that's a bit of a misnomer. The hull is completely contiguous. You have essentially 2 adjoined shuttle bay doors, and those are each 10 meters by 40 meters. So that can launch a fair amount of craft, including small fighters and runabouts. It also has several onboard wet labs and a very powerful dorsal subspace sensor array. This allows it to track its position in relative real space compared to where it currently is in subspace, and thus is a very key navigational instrument without which you could end up far from your desired destination. So, that brings us to the career and service lives of the members of the Emissary class, of course beginning with the USS Emissary launching in 2445, followed by the USS Gabriel, the USS Hermes, and the USS Sarek. As you can tell, this is a relatively short-run class due to its highly experimental nature, but it's fair to say that these ships had a significant impact in history. The USS Emissary would lead peace envoys to several species, including the Undine, inhabiting fluidic space, and the Founders. While their mission to the Founders' homeworld proved very successful and opened friendly relations between the New Dominion under Odo and the Federation, the mission to fluidic space went far less successfully, and they were unable to start a dialogue with the Undine. As well as that, the USS Emissary would go on to chart the Delta Quadrant. Her sister ship, the USS Gabriel, succeeded in discovering interphasic space, an entire nexus of subspace dimensions where multiple species were able to connect their various pocket dimensions to one centralized hub, and this allowed access and trade between these various dimensions. Rediscovering the Elachi and Herc. Unfortunately, this discovery was a double-sided sword, as it did also reveal a number of hostile species. The USS Hermes would be lost in combat against unknown enemies, though we now suspect it was likely the Solanae. However, there were also many benefits to this discovery, and throughout the course of her career, the USS Sarek admitted 7 new members to the Federation. The Emissary herself would be lost in subspace in 2471. The remainder of the class would go on to be involved in the building conflict with the Sphere Builders. So, just to wrap things up, I think the Emissary class is an interesting look at the future of Starfleet and what starships can look like in the future, and how various design lineages can develop, evolve, and converge. I think it harkens back to the Galaxy class, and also, interestingly, the Rockwell class. It's got a lot of Rockwell vibes going on as well, and I think that kind of indicates what this ship is really about. It is a pioneer, it is daring, it is risky, it is unprecedented. I think that more ties it to the Rockwell, but also the Galaxy class, which was an incredibly ambitious design. What the Galaxy set out to do was nothing short of impressive. So as I say, it's risky, it's ambitious, it pushes the technical envelope, all to find new ways for Starfleet to fly and find new worlds and new civilizations. And I think in the very comfortable world of the 25th century, where things can seem so certain and predictable, I think the Emissary is a good shake-up of that particular paradigm. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you all in the next video. Thanks to my over 100 members for supporting the channel. My glorious Navarks, Tully DT, Sean Farrell, Rella, Macross Schaffer, and Zaylan Maru. My ever-dutiful commanders, Philip Ty, Birdmonster, Jeff Hallam, Mark Philippe, Robert Kahn Strider, David Reeves, Gabe Logan, Adam Bowman, Nicholas Walsh, Martin McConville, JC Tech Wizard, Alcara Dreamer, Gloom Cookie, Der Monarch, Jamal Soto, Tin Alt, and Sean Hall. And I salute my Centurions, Pendlebury, Marcus Hall, Julian Arnott, Freedom Trooper, Okulkatum Questo, John Nicole, Athys Collection, Tobias Klein, Marzarine, Bird of Play D3, Khan the Skektal Overlord, David Jackson, Andy Clark, Quentin King, Shipmaster, Valletta Petra Seineren, and Jeffany Hughes. And I thank all my loyal sub-lieutenants. And I welcome Traven158 and Grant Mills. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel, and as always, I will see you all in the next video.